Welcome to the 100X Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Mary Cronin, co-author of The 100X Entrepreneur, the book. And today I'm talking to Ben Goodwin, who is the co-founder, CEO, and formulator of OLIPOP. And even if you love OLIPOP, and I hope you do, I do, you may not know the whole backstory of why Ben founded this company, and in particular, why he was so determined to create a great tasting and healthy soda, sell it to millions of consumers, while simultaneously, this is an even harder part. That was challenging, but the even harder part is that Ben's vision was to build a billion-dollar company that was going to have a positive social impact in a broader way for consumers and for all of us. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to start with the question about what was that vision for OLIPOP? What made you so determined to do something so hard?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, Mary, thank you so much for having me on. And it's a pleasure to talk to you again. My first time, as far as I know, with this kind of a feature in a book. So it's a big milestone and it's a real privilege, and really excited to be chatting with you and your listeners today. So, yeah, I mean, you are very right. It is, in fact, very difficult. It is funny. Sometimes I have younger folks reach out because they're interested in becoming beverage entrepreneurs. And, I don't necessarily tell them not to do it, but I do try to make the difficulty clear. And I think that the folks who are going to take a shot and have a high chance of success, they're going to be the ones that kind of ignore my feedback anyway. Certainly when I was 20 and kind of getting into it, I didn't think it was going to be easy. I didn't know how difficult it was going to be. But even if you had warned me at the time, I think I would have said, well, off I go anyway. And I think that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit. But yeah, I mean, it is a simple reality. I think only 0.4% of beverage brands make it to $10 million in revenue. So, the OLIPOP outcome really is a 0.01, or even if you think about the fact that we, created basically a new category and, have completed research at this point, we're probably 0.001% outcome. But it is really, really worth doing, especially when you have a mission behind you, which I know we'll talk about today. So yeah, I mean, I grew up pretty low income, actually. It was weird because I grew up in a somewhat affluent area, but we still grew up really low income. I think I moved more than 10 times before I was 17 because we kept getting evicted and all this kind of stuff. So, I did live had that experience, and a lot of Americans have that experience. And one of the things that tends to go hand in hand with that is kind of lower quality food. So I grew up drinking plenty of soda, and not that I'm calling soda low quality, but in terms of cost available, I ended up drinking a lot of soda and eating a lot of fast food, and that didn't work out great for me. So by the time I was a teenager, I was kind of overweight. I had a lot of anxiety and different challenges. And I just like at 14 or 15 had this, I call it my autodidactic epiphany, which is probably a little heavy-handed, but essentially just realized that this was not going to create a good life to go in that direction and have this real change of lifestyle approach. I really focused on my diet and then eventually kind of exercise and mental health. I lost something like 50 to 60 pounds in less than a year and shifted a lot of things in my approach to school and friends, and really just changed my whole life around. I expected to lose weight. I expected to have more energy. So I did experience all those kind of like body composition things, but what really shifted or what was the most impactful for me how a couple of years into that journey, like my clarity of thinking and my emotional stability was a lot greater. And the deeper I got into nutrition, it seemed like the more I felt those benefits. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, this is a very powerful self-actualization tool, especially for, coming out of an environment where you could control so little and were relatively just disempowered. This was something that I could actually take full control of and feel the benefits from it. And, that I was really impressed with the idea that this is something that could be really powerful for other people, especially if you consider, like, once I got a bit older and started looking at all the health data, the United States, according to the CDC, has 40 to 50% of the population is type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. Their projection by the CDC is that by 2050, about 1.3 billion human beings will have type 2 diabetes. It's the single largest health epidemic we've ever experienced as a species, and it's largely self-inflicted and addressable through lifestyle, mostly diet. So, I dropped out of college at 20. There's a handful of reasons for that. Some of it was not wanting to go into debt. Others, parts of it is just like I am in the end hardwired to be an entrepreneur. Wanted to kind of get that path started. I did get into beverage. I was very, very, very early at a kombucha company. And at the kombucha company, I was trying to figure out what kombucha even supposedly did, because I'm out doing demos being like, it's good for you. And I'm like, I should probably figure out why. And in looking it up, I learned about the microbiome. And the microbiome has a lot of fascinating aspects to it. I think it's one of the most systemically powerful parts of our body in terms of the health benefits and all the digestion and immune system and including like skin health but specifically there's something called the brain gut axis. So we actually ferment about the majority of our hormones and the majority of our neurotransmitters in our microbiome, and those two things in particular have an enormous impact on our overall health, but also how we feel and how we think. And that's where the light bulb went off for me. Like, whoa, this is probably a big part of what I experienced when I went through my health journey. So, and then I left the kombucha company eventually. Found out I was a good product developer. Started up a company in my mid-20s, which is really where this healthy soda idea began. And the logic there was just I had spent a couple of years working on a healthy fermented product, non-alcoholic. Had these big breakthroughs and felt like I really had a blank canvas and decided to go into the world of soda because obviously it's this enormous and deeply cherished, deeply American product that people have this incredible relationship to. But obviously it's the number one added source of sugar in the American diet, and there are a lot of different problems with the kind of health components of the product. And the rest is a little bit history. That first company didn't work out, but I am resilient if nothing else. And I bounced back with OLIPOP, and the rest is all history. We've had triple digit growth every year up until this year, where we still have very strong double digit growth. And it's been a absolute rocket ship. I've learned a lot along the way, and it's a real, honor and a privilege to be able to serve so many customers.
And you know what? I am going to ask you to turn the page a bit right now towards the business side.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, you're resilient. You didn't give up. You made up your mind. You did it. Wow. Congratulations. We agreed it was hard. Most companies don't succeed in doing
Right.
what you've done. So can you highlight for us two or three reasons why OLIPOP made it on a business plane? What made you successful in winning over those consumers, get their loyalty, get into those grocery stores and other retail outlets? Just the highlights.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously, on one piece of it was right product or right concept, right time. But what's interesting about that, and this does go to something for your listeners, is at the time the data story was actually quite counterintuitive to the category, and I had advisors who basically told me it was the stupidest possible thing I could do. They're like, look, soda's been declining at that time, point to a point and a half for the last decade straight. It's also as the largest, most powerful incumbent brands in the world. This is a suicide mission. And, on its face, that was one interpretation of the data. The other interpretation, though, of the situation was that it was an incredibly important category with really widespread access, but that there was a large amount of underlying discontent, and there was a lot of people leaving soda, but that didn't mean they had fallen out of love with soda. They had just fallen out of love with the kind of complex relationship they had had with it. And when we found out how to get the product and the category explanation right, that really resonated with folks. So there is a component to there in terms of market timing. I think another piece for us has always been, I think a lot of my executive coach was talking about this. A lot of good entrepreneurs at their heart are craftsmen or craftspeople. And I am 0% exception to that. My craft is at the heart of everything that matters to me. And in this particular case, this expression of my craft was the formulation component, the formula in general, and the absolute unrelenting quality standard, because I do 100% of our novel formulation even today. So everything going out the door has got to have a certain quality of taste profile. I don't cut corners. I keep working until I'm personally satisfied with it and my bar is high. And I also know there's going to be some taste drift from the lab bench to the finished can. So it's got to be good enough to start with so that it's still good at the other end of that drift. But also that the functionality is authentic and that it really provides value that consumers feel, but that also when you scrutinize it under scientific research, which we've done, it holds up and is actually impressive in its delivery, right? And if you put that all in a package that is empathetic, that meets the consumer where it is, that doesn't talk down to the consumer, I think you will get something that can be lightning in a bottle, and that drove a lot. Those are two of the things. Keeping it quasi brief, those are two of the things that were very important for our success.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you to keep going here with a question that maybe if you think back, you could identify what were some of the wow, this is really working. I'm going to achieve velocity here moments for you. What were you looking at and how did you recognize those moments as the company launched and started getting traction, started finding followers and consumer fans? What were your turning points?
There were a couple of them. So firstly, we did have really strong trial and repeat velocity right out of the gate. I remember some early Whole Foods in Northern California. We didn't even know if the product had hit the store or not, because when we went to go check on it, it was completely gone from the shelf. And it had everything we put in the store had sold out in less than 24 hours, which was kind of mind blowing for all of us. One of the big moments where I felt like, oh no, there's something really special here. This isn't, you never think that you're going to be a flash in the pan. But one of the moments was actually COVID. COVID is obviously a make or break moment for many, many brands. But, going into that year, we thought to ourselves, we're still an early company. We're probably still an impulse purchase for a lot of consumers. So we're kind of thinking to ourselves, a lot of consumers then are going in and getting a sandwich or whatever, and they're grabbing an OLIPOP to try it out. So we ended up building this big D2C function at the start of that year because we wanted to go capture consumers as they were switching their buying habits. But we ended up hitting our entire year's revenue forecast in brick and mortar retail anyway, and all the D2C revenue was on top. I mean, that year we grew 960%. And I was like, what is happening? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And what we ended up finding out was that for the consumers that we had like a relationship with, their product and brand affinity was already so high that they treated OLIPOP like a staple. So they were going in and they were loading up on the full amount they needed for their whole week, not just grabbing it willy-nilly. And I think the final kind of proof point that something was really here because all that data was great, and that's all okay, cool. You're doing well in these more affluent areas, you're doing well in these more natural channels. But the real crossover moment was Target was one of the Kroger was actually the first conventional retail we worked with, but Target really put us to the test with a heavy duty Midwest 200 store test. So I think it was like Oklahoma and Texas and maybe New Mexico, but it was like it wasn't affluent coastal areas. It was really conventional shoppers. And I think 3 weeks into their into their program for us, we had already exceeded the velocities that they had set as a target for us. I think 3 months into the program. And at that point, I was like, okay, we're also polling these crazy numbers in the center of the country. This has monstrous, this has a monstrous ceiling.
That's wonderful. Lots of wows packed into
Lots of wows.
very
And
brief.
there are more, but those are my big turning points in the
Well, I
history of
asked
it.
you for the highlights, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's fair. And I want to get to what I honestly admire so much about you and Olipop, way beyond the 100X entrepreneur, which of course is very important. And that is your proof of concept that you were able to change the soda drinking habits and loyalty of so many millions of consumers. But now I'd like to ask you about your decision to become a certified benefits corporation, which, as you and I know, means that you've put your corporate entity and business planning on the line to be good for all of your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, and your investors, and your community at large. Why did you decide to do that? How do you think that contributes to the success of Olipop?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was I am so we have two layers. So one, we're a certified public benefits corporation at the corporate level, at the kind of that format of the C corp, and then on top of that, we are B Corp certified, which is a separate certifying body, and we elected to do both. And for me, I'm obviously a big proponent of empirical evidence, right? And I think that's really, really important in the health and wellness space, or in general in the air quotes do-goodery space, because like a good example of this is, as of like last year's data, there's a $300 billion health and wellness market between food supplements and beverage, and less than 1% of the brands in that space, they're all charging a premium, mind you, and less than 1% of the brands in that space have any independent uh, research to validate their claims, right? And which I'm just like, well, isn't that just cynical? You've got these customers trying to make a positive change in their life, giving you a premium amount of dollars to accomplish that, and you are not able to ensure that that value exchange is doing right by that customer. And I think that has to change. So any time I've had an opportunity to just ensure that not only are we keeping ourselves honest with the kind of empirical outputs with how we're running the business, but we're able to go communicate about that in a public way. I'm very, very excited that we are a successful business. The team works super hard day in, day out to accomplish that. And I think that it's really important that businesses are an incredibly powerful tool to do good in the world. And what I'm looking to build is a case study that allows their not just to say you can do some nice or positive things and you can be a successful business, but if you set your structures up correctly, you can get a disproportionate economic outcome by being a really strong business. And I want to set the case study together that helps entrepreneurs who are, following up in the future.
And Ben, that's such a powerful idea. And I would like to talk to you for at least another 5 hours about that. But there is more about that in the 100X Entrepreneur book. And I hope we will honestly have a chance to talk about social impact and doubling down on benefits for all of your stakeholders in maybe a follow-up conversation that's
I'd
more
love that.
geared to that.
Yeah.
It's so important and it's so powerful, and the companies that are doing it are making a much needed change. And right now in the world, inspiring people to commit to that, I feel is more important than it ever has been. So,
I agree. And Mary, if I can make a point for, because
yes,
I'm just, want to make sure I leave a breadcrumb of real value for your listeners. I think that, um, you know, and I said in a recent interview that one of my favorite quotes is by Charles Darwin, which is in nature, nothing always works and nothing never works. So just because I feel this way or I think this is important doesn't mean that this is the only way to approach things. But I do feel like often there's a little bit too much of a focus in general in our society, but certainly also in business on the symptom and not the root structure. At the end of the day, your consumers, your customers, they are giving you their time, money, and attention because of a perception of value. And so I really feel like your focus as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, needs to be relentlessly on what is that value. And now don't set up a stupid P&L. Don't set up something that can't scale. Make sure you surround yourselves with the right professionals that can help to professionalize that business. But if you do it correctly and you build a extremely clear value case, the money will come as long as you are hitting the market at the right time. And I find that these folks who are too myopically focused on running straight for the money oftentimes end up missing out on the mechanics that deliver the money.
I love that. That's a great piece of advice. And we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask you for a few more pieces of advice. But right now, I'd like to ask my semi-final question, which
You bet.
is uh, if you could talk a little bit about what next for you. On the characteristic of every entrepreneur is you're never done, you're never
Right.
satisfied, there's always a new mountain to climb. So, what would you be able to share with us about your business and personal goals for the year ahead?
Yeah. Look, I certainly there's some stuff that never really changes. You're just stacking on top, right? So we will be an even bigger business next year with an even more resilient P&L. We've got really excited research in the pipeline. In fact, I can't reveal all the data yet, but we just got some human data back yet that shows that OLIPOP improved A1C levels for folks who were participatory. We've got another really amazing study coming out that's a bit scaled up, looking at working with humans with prediabetes. So the research is going to keep compiling. The business is going to keep growing. I know I'm always excited about the flavors, but that I developed that are coming out. But we have some flavors coming out next year that I will tell you were an absolute delight to work on. One of them has been kicking around in my head for 2+ years, and I can't begin to express the joy. And I know it's gonna kill. Like the our customers are gonna go out, they're gonna try some of these flavors, and that delight is gonna be going to be able to taste that in the product. And we've done a lot of really important leadership hiring this year. When you grow as fast as we have, you end up acquiring something called organizational debt, and not monetarily, but with systems and with the org chart, stuff like that. So we've made a bunch of really important personnel and leadership decisions this year. They've been doing an astronomical amount of work on capability up leveling. A lot of work in particular has gone into the kind of commercial side and the marketing side. So there's also going to be a bunch of really cool marketing coming out next year. So it's going to be a banger.
I can't wait, and I can't wait for those new flavors. Wow. I
Yeah,
don't know how you do it, and that's another conversation as well. Is oh my God, how do you
we've got
keep
we've got episodes in us. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this will be a whole series about Ben Goodwin and Olipop. Nope, not possible because there's so many other great stories in this book, but I mean it. You've got
Read
so
the
many
book,
of them.
guys. It's really fun. Lots of good lessons in
Thank
there.
you. And
Yeah.
so the final question, which I really don't want to skip, is you've learned so much. You are intrinsically inspiring. And let's face it, Ben, you're super successful. And a lot of people are going to listen to you because of that, as well as the great things you're doing and the really important impact you're having on consumer health. So, what would be three pieces of advice that you'd like to wrap up with today?
Let's see. Sometimes I struggle with the list of three, but we'll see what we can do. I mean, one thing that I think is really important and it's not talked about enough. In fact, I recently did a CNBC interview where um, the journalist was asking me about stuff I would have gotten out ahead of earlier in my Olipop journey. And I gave her my response, which is all interpersonal stuff. And she was like, oh, whoa, most people are just saying like AI right now. And I'm like, that's just the most boring answer. But, what was cool is I got some feedback from folks at like major banks that were like, I just showed this to my whole junior team, in terms of how they're approaching career development. So I don't think people are out discussing this stuff enough. And at the end of the day, when you look at the data around success and impact, so much more of it is interpersonal than it is like you'll figure out the building blocks if you build the right team and you have the right passion. So, one big piece of advice is really about knowing yourself as an entrepreneur, and kind of figuring yourself out three-dimensionally. I think that that's one of the big difference is between being an entrepreneur and a founder and being successful versus people who take a little bit more of the corporate track. I think you can be have a little bit more of a two-dimensional psychology in some of the big places, whereas being an entrepreneur, it's coming at you from every single angle. So I, really think that like three-dimensional self-awareness is important, and you are just as responsible. In fact, you are equally responsible for really finding out what your strengths are and learning how to harness those, learning how to have trust and faith in yourself for those things. You're also as responsible for figuring out where your weak points are and creating a mitigation plan around them, and having taking responsibility for that you need to fix those things and not making them everybody else's problem. And if you are able to work with yourself like that, I think that helps. And it also helps with the second piece of advice, which is, clinging to relevancy or fears about relevancy as you scale. As an entrepreneur founder, there's just certain things that everybody else in the business is better at than me. So what are the things that I need to, again, getting back to like my strengths or the things the torch that I can uniquely bear, how do I double or triple down on that for myself so I provide long-term value? And how do I not micromanage or become a control freak with the people around me? But then I also make sure I'm getting good enough people in the business that I don't have to be a control freak. And how do I also make sure I'm getting people in the business who are genuinely mission motivated, because I need to be able to rely on them to be in their seat and making decisions from the right place. So I think that those things are very, very important. And then, if it isn't obvious, being mission driven is really the core of who I am. And, it just ends up giving you to be really authentic and reflective and philosophical. It's not a waste of time, because you have to make a million different decisions. One of the most important, and a lot of them are ethically gray or really complex or happening in a pressure cooker. And so, how do you constantly have an internal compass about where you need to go and why, and how do you communicate that to the rest of your team? Being really clear on your mission and making sure that you're elevating yourself enough to connect with that, I think is really important. So that's roughly three.
Ben, it wasn't a quiz, and those
Yeah,
were all so important. There's no way to prioritize the value and the self-understanding and the relevance. Uh, So I'm not surprised that a lot of other corporations want to share those insights with their own teams. And thank you. You know what? Thank you 100x times because this has been such a fabulous conversation. And I thought, I had studied up and listened and we had great conversations. And then I wrote the chapter. I thought I had kind of had like my master class in OLIPOP, but I haven't even scratched the surface of what you have to share. So thank you
Thank
so
you so
much
much,
for
Mary.
this.
Yeah. It's a blessing and a curse, but I'm happy to be back on, and we can dig into more stuff that you want to talk about.
Well, I won't hold you to it right now, but I won't forget either because this has been a fabulous conversation, and I've learned yet more about what makes a 100x entrepreneur sustainable as well as successful in the business and financial plane. So thanks, Ben. Really been a pleasure.
You bet. Thank you so much.